Hi, everyone. So, we're looking at chapters 8 and 9, looking at sexuality during childhood, adolescence, and then into the adult and the later adult years. We'll look a little bit at like some of the hallmarks of each age, a little bit about adult relationships and adult sexuality, and then sexuality and aging. Oh, let's see, there we go. So, from the beginning of life, we actually have the capacity for sexual response. We talked about this a little bit in class, that our capacity for sexual response is present before birth. Ultrasounds have shown male fetuses with erections. Females have the capacity for vaginal lubrication from the moment that they're born, right? So we see that we have that capacity at a very, very young age. During the first couple of years of life, you see a lot of children kind of discovering the pleasure of genital stimulation in some way, right? It's really, really common to see young children rubbing their genitals against things for pleasure. They're kind of learning about their bodies, learning that there are places in their bodies that feel good when they are touched. Very common to see little girls like rocking back and forth on top of things, or little boys kind of like touching themselves absent-mindedly. It's not considered like masturbation or anything to that effect. It's just kind of more driven by curiosity and that there is something that feels good and they might not understand why. As children get a little bit older, right, and kind of into childhood, it's hard to figure out what is like normal and healthy sexual behavior. There's just so much variation in sexual development and all the different experiences that occur during this time frame. What we do see is that it does affect adult sexuality. So, as children are doing things like masturbating for the first time, which can be a very natural form of like sexual expression during the childhood years, as uncomfortable as that might make some people, it is something that children start to do. It can be a very like natural, normal thing for them to do. But the reactions that they get from parents or siblings or friends or family members, whatnot, can definitely like shape their attitudes. And as I mentioned, it's usually really driven by more curiosity rather than sexuality. We sometimes call this like the age of discovery, just in general, which can also include sexuality. Another thing that you sometimes see in childhood that is also pretty normal is children kind of engaging in sex play with friends or siblings or family members, like cousins, for example, playing doctor, inspecting each other, kind of simulating some level of like sexual activity, right? This is very, very common and it again can make people very uncomfortable, but it's important that parents and like family members react with a degree of like, I don't know, patience and understanding and normality of it. Yeah, as you don't want to shame them too much, which can heavily shape their attitudes as they get older. As we get a little bit older, right, definitely getting more and more aware of sexuality. I love this picture, right? I think it's time we had to talk about sex and the kid being like, what do you want to know, right? I think with, technology being what it is, oftentimes children and kind of young adolescents know so much, so much so quickly, sometimes too quickly. But as we get into adolescence and we're in that span of like 12 to 20, children enter puberty, right? And they're going through that period of like rapid physical change. Hormones are being released on a new level. Their secondary sex characteristics are starting to come in. So things other than like the genitals, right? So we're looking at body hair, breasts, deepened voice, widened shoulders. We see all of these sexual characteristics starting to come into play as those hormones are being released and really like starting that chain event of processes or like chain of events rather. So what we see at this period of time is that girls enter puberty when they have their first menstrual cycle, typically around like the age of like 11 and a half to 12 is pretty average, though this can be all over the place. My oldest started at 9 and my two youngest haven't started yet and they're 11 and a half. So it can really greatly range, but the average is somewhere around like 11 to 12. We also see that this starts for boys with their first like ejaculation. The males begin to produce sperm somewhere around age 11 and 12 as well. We see a lot of non-coital sex happening between teenagers. Now, the first age that, or like the average age that people have sex for the first time is right around 17. But we see a lot of non-coital sex, so physical contact, kissing, touching, manual or oral genital stimulation between teenagers. Fellatio would be oral sex performed on a man, cunnilingus oral sex performed on a woman. These are things that we see a lot of as we are kind of coming to grips with our sexuality, exploring relationships, having hormones be present during this period of puberty. Despite all of the decreases in our pregnancy rates, there's still a lot of teenagers who do become pregnant. It's estimated that like 1 in 5 sexually active teenage women will actually become pregnant, right? And a lot of reasons for this, but a lot of it tends to gear around like needing better sex education, needing condoms and contraceptive methods to be more readily available, not understanding how pregnancy occurs, not understanding how to protect yourself or have safe sex. So we do see that teenagers are having higher rates of pregnancy. Now, I think we're doing a little bit better depending on the state that you live in. California has pretty comprehensive sex education programs. But if we look at national rates, this is something that has kind of been a little bit on the rise over the last like 10 to 20 years. And pregnant teens are more likely to have complications, to face increased obstacles, right? And so it's really important to be educating teenagers about not only the pleasures of sex, but the dangers of sex and how to protect yourself and providing things like condoms or free contraceptive services and having those open conversations. Part of that relates to sex education. And I'm sure each one of you has gone through some degree of sex education at some point in your schooling. I have signed a couple of forms for my children at various stages where they're learning about different things and seeing their reactions throughout the whole process, which has just been incredibly entertaining and interesting to watch. But there are kind of two main forms of programs. There's a comprehensive program that tends to begin in kindergarten. It goes all the way through 12th grade. They present a wide variety of topics. It kind of scaffolds and builds as they go. And this is what California tends to do here in our state, obviously, where we tend to like present things that are developmentally appropriate. So we talk about like anatomy and gender. And then in like 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, middle school, we start talking about things like how do you get pregnant and what are different hormones and talking about menstrual cycles. It's very comprehensive in building as children get older. Other states and other places embrace the abstinence only kind of programs where we focus only on like abstaining from sexual behavior. There isn't any information about contraception, so how to protect yourself or how disease is spread and how to prevent that. And so this obviously leads to a lot of misinformation and can be really dangerous because you're relying on kind of fear rather than education. It's kind of the old like don't have sex or you'll get pregnant and die, right? Like that's like from oh my gosh, Mean Girls. I just forgot the name of the movie. But a very common approach in many states still, rather than being a little bit more comprehensive. As we get into adulthood, right, dating becomes something that is a huge, like, social undertaking. People going out on some kind of mutually agreed upon social activity. And dating has changed so much over time. If we just look at trends, there's less dating today. People tend to hang out more like in groups. It tends to be more casual rather than more formal. It is something that is very evolving, right? And it tends to have just like a different dynamic over time. An incredible number of like online dating sites and hookup sites are out there and available. As people get a little bit older, I think they tend to use these a little bit more. But social media and dating and online websites tend to play a big part in the whole dating culture. A big part of many people's adult life is marriage, right? Or being in a committed relationship, being in a long-term committed relationship, which may or may not include that social and legal contract of marriage between two individuals. What we do see is a lot of people do get married, right, at some point in their life. And unfortunately, a lot of people do get married more than once, right? We'll talk about divorce on the next slide or on a coming slide. But couples today are more likely to marry later in life than in the past, and also more likely to marry more than once. And what we see is that the average age for a person's first marriage now is about 28 for men and 26 for women, a little bit later than it was like 10 to 20 years ago. Oftentimes, the quality of the friendship that you have with your spouse, with your partner, is the most important factor in marital satisfaction, right? So, your ability to kind of talk things out and resolve conflict and enjoy your time with each other tends to be a big predictor of how well the relationship is going to be and how well it's going to last and how well it'll go. People who are married or in a committed relationship of some kind tend to be happier and healthier, live longer lives, react less severely to trauma and stressful events. Having someone that you share your life with and you have that deep connection with tends to be a protective factor. Deciding on children is something that tends to come up at some point during long-term committed relationships. More and more people are remaining childless or kind of having children later. No children means you have more time, you can focus more on your relationship, but having children means that you have something to contribute to and live beyond you. So it's kind of this, decision that a lot of couples will make as they enter into several years of a committed relationship. And in terms of marriage and sex, the norm is for couples to engage in less sex as the marriage or relationship progresses, though this varies greatly. It's not so much that people stop being attracted to each other, just as much as life might kind of more get in the way. So the pressures of having children or work or commuting or finances, whatever it might be, health tends to be a really big one as well as people get older. So nearly all adults, it's something like 90%, form some kind of long-term loving partnership. And while heterosexual marriage is the norm, there's a lot of other types of relationships and partnerships that exist. People can cohabitate where you live with someone, but you're not married, right? Like you're in a relationship and you live with them, but it doesn't necessarily have a formal official title. Domestic partnerships are unmarried couples who live together, and they are in a committed relationship, maybe with some legal protections or paperwork, but they're not married. A lot of people also just stay single. They're celibate or they are with a bunch of different partners. They never kind of tie themselves down or commit. That's also something that's relatively common. Polygamy is where you have marriage, which includes more than two partners. Swinging, where people kind of exchange partners for sexual interaction outside of a marriage. You have a lot of people who also identify as asexual and might have some kind of like very deep friendship, but there's no sexual or romantic involvement whatsoever. So, kind of all over the place, there's a lot of different types of relationships, though heterosexual marriage and a long-term loving partnership is definitely the norm. Unfortunately, a lot of relationships do end, right? And a big part of that often can be like an extramarital relationship or what you would term an affair. Unfortunately, a lot of marriages do end in divorce. There's been really substantial changes in the institution of marriage over the past 30 years. When people get divorced, they cancel like the legal duties and responsibilities of the marriage. They dissolve the marriage between those two people. It's something that's done legally and also, of course, like socially and emotionally as well. But it's very, very common that couples divorce. And for it to be mutual is relatively uncommon. It's often one partner or the other who tends to initiate it. Marriages fail for a million reasons, right? Or long-term committed relationships, I should say, fail for a million reasons. It could be that hurried into it and it wasn't the right person, or they cheat on you, or the pressures of life are too much. You fall out of love with each other, you grow apart. There's a million reasons why a relationship might fail. But what we do see is that most people get back together with somebody else, right? Most divorced men and women remarry or re-enter into a long-term committed relationship. That is also the norm and where we tend to see why we have multiple marriages or multiple long-term relationships kind of being the new common like occurrence. As we get older, like into later life, our physical changes obviously occur, right? So, like, we do see that we have some changes in our sexual response cycle, right? We don't tend to experience as much like arousal and interest in sex, but The idea that old age is a sexless time is really, for the most part, like false, right? Hard to look at like this cute woman in her little swim cap here. I don't know. She looks like a Marge to me, right? Hard to look at Marge and think that like she's interested in sex, but oftentimes our sexuality as an older person is very directly connected to our sexuality when we were younger. If you were a sexual person when you were younger and had a high interest level, likely that it will stay the same. Also, availability to a partner, right? If you have somebody that it's easy to be intimate with, and your health. Health is one of the most crucial factors that we tend to see impacting adult sexuality. If people have poor health, it tends to have a greater impact than their age. So age can be really subjective. It can oftentimes just be a number. Very, very different paths for people as they get older. But your health and your sexuality when you were younger tend to be the strongest predictors. All right, so that is everything for chapters 8 and 9. Thank you so much, everyone, and I'll see you for the next one.